Jacob seduced two of his housemaids after committing bigamy. Judah committed incest with his daughter-in-law. David was a polygamist, an adulterer, a robber, and a murderer. And Solomon had 1,000 wives and concubines. Other ancestors of Jesus, such as Rehoboam, Abijam, Joram, Ahaziah, Jotham, Ahaz, Manasseh, Ammon, and Jehoiachin, were often purveyors of iniquity as well. And it's also interesting to note that only 4 women are mentioned in Jesus' ancestry. Yet Tamar seduced the father of her late husband. Rahab was a common prostitute. Ruth went to bed with one of her cousins instead of marrying another cousin. And Bathsheba was involved in adultery, all of which were noted in a prior program. In fact, you could even include Eve, since she is supposedly the mother of all humanity and a prime culprit in the fall of mankind. So one would hardly be justified in saying that Jesus came from good stock. Our final topic for today pertains to the question of whether or not Jesus ever lived to begin with, a subject generally known as historicity. Was he an historical figure or a product of folklore and fantasy? Anyone who has attempted to investigate this question with any degree of objectivity is eventually struck by the absence of extra-biblical information on anyone by the name of Jesus of Nazareth. Several apologetic writers all but admit as much. On page 31 in the book entitled The Bible Has the Answer, apologists Morris and Clark say, quote, "The only real information we have about Christ and his life is in the 4 Gospels," unquote. On page 64 in the book entitled Basic Theology, Dallas theological professor Charles Ryrie says, quote, "All that we know about the life of Christ appears in the Bible," unquote. On page 130 in the book entitled 99 Questions People Ask Most About the Bible, apologist Don Stewart says, quote, there are no other first-hand accounts of the life of Christ apart from the Gospels. All other documents that have survived were written quite some time after the life of Christ," unquote. As the apologist Walter Martin said on April 7, 1989 on his Bible Answer Man radio program, quote, "I can tell you right now, there are no bona fide documented historical materials about the secret teachings or life of Jesus outside of the New Testament documents. It's fantasy, and it has no historical reference whatever." One could hardly be more emphatic. Stated succinctly, there is almost nothing in all of ancient literature having to do with an individual by the name of Jesus Christ. In fact, the scholar Maurice Bucaille noted that there is precious little about the life of Jesus in the Bible itself. On page 58 in his book entitled The Bible, the Quran, and Science, he states, quote, "According to the declaration of the Second Vatican Council, a faithful account of the actions and words of Jesus is to be found in the Gospels. But it is impossible to reconcile this with the existence in the text of contradictions, improbabilities, things which are materially impossible, or statements which run contrary to firmly established reality." In any event, Christian apologists are hard-pressed to find any writing of that era that can be related to Jesus Christ. Despite all their efforts, they have been unable to scrounge up enough quotes to fill a couple of pages of normal written material, which only shows how desperate the situation is from their perspective. However, There are a handful of non-Christian writers whom Christians claim made statements in support of a real Jesus. So in order to leave no stone unturned, in our next program, we'll discuss the quotes that emanate from each. In closing, we just can't help but note one additional factor that is well worth considering in this whole matter. Christians refer to the following as mythological pagan figures: Hercules, Osiris, Bacchus, Mithra, Hermes, Prometheus, Perseus, and Horus. All were pre-Christian sun gods, and yet all allegedly had gods for fathers and virgins for mothers, had their births announced by stars and celestial music, were born on the solstice around December 25th, had tyrants who tried to kill them when they were babies, met with violent deaths, and rose from the dead. Moreover, nearly all were worshipped by wise men and were alleged to have fasted 40 days. Information of this kind is enough to cause any intelligent observer to pause and think. When the fact that there is precious little outside the Bible that would lead one to believe that the figure within the Bible known as Jesus Christ ever existed, a fact we'll prove in our next program, when that fact is combined with the fact that there is a considerable body of information showing the similarity between the life of Jesus and other mythological figures of ancient times, the conclusion is hard to avoid. Jesus is an imaginary figure of Christian mythology in the tradition of pagan mythology, and there is almost nothing in all of ancient literature that would lead anyone to believe otherwise. Anyone who wants to believe that Jesus lived and walked as a real live human being is going to have to do so despite the evidence, not because of it. That will be discussed in our next program. That completes our presentation. And please join us later for the 16th edition of Biblical Errancy Commentary, when we'll continue showing why the Bible is nothing more than the flawed composition of some fallible human beings. Thank you for listening.